everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. Today, we are exploring what happens when the ground beneath us and the systems above us begin to fracture, which today is very in sync and interesting that that is the topic, considering world events. Joining us is Anne-Marie. Is it Mawhiney?
Mawhiney.
Mawhiney. Okay, I wanted to make sure I said that correctly. The author of the gripping new work, Fugitive Rifts. Anne-Marie, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you today.
Thank you so much. I've been so much looking forward to this conversation.
I'm so glad to hear that. Well, I'm very interested in learning more about your book here. So, Fugitive Rifts is such an evocative title. Without spoilers, what was the initial spark that led you to this story of people fleeing through the cracks of a broken world?
Well, I think constant theme in my writing is people facing challenges and how they go about getting through that, getting past it, and rebuilding. And it started with actually the earthquake in Thailand in 2004 when somebody I supervised asked for leave to go there to help a group of women who were forming a collective to rebuild their world by doing finger weaving. They had lost all their looms and they were fundraising to be able to buy yarn to generate an income to feed their families and start to rebuild their world. Connected me to that particular crisis in a way that other ones I felt a bit detached from. And the title of the book, Fugitive Rifts, fugitive has at least two meanings. One, of course, is fleeing, running away from something, being taken away from something. But there's a geological explanation or term, fugitive, that is about something winding up in an unexpected place where you don't expect them to be. So, for instance, during the Ice Age, rock formations of a certain composition were carried vast, even thousands of miles to new places, and as the ice melted, deposited in unexpected places where you wouldn't think to find that kind of rock. And both concepts fit what happens in this story. And then, of course, rifts, there's social rifts, there's geological rifts, different kinds of rifts, again, that are all things that happen in this particular book.
Wow. Wow, that's some really great information. And that story you said about the tsunami, that's very inspiring. So this sounds like something I haven't read yet, so I need to read it apparently. So pacing is a tightrope walk here. How do you decide when to let the reader breathe and when to pull the rug out from under them to keep that fugitive tension high?
It's a really good question. Part of it is from watching TV and movies and recognizing that after a very emotive scene, we cut to something else that kind of allows us some space to settle back in. And part of it is that when I'm writing one of those emotive scenes, I have to enter into it. I have to become the character and I have to live their emotions and their strategies as they go through it. And it's exhausting. So then I want to go someplace else where I can catch my breath. So the pacing is kind of set up in both those ways.
Wow. So your protagonist is navigating a world that feels increasingly precarious, obvious. So, how do you approach building that internal world so that they stay relatable even when those circumstances are extreme?
Well, I had a grandmother that I was very close to, and she used two terms. One is taking the high road when people are and situations are not what you want. And the other one is to look at the glass is half full. So in precarious situations, I have a lot of my characters kind of look at the glass half full, not what I've lost, but what do I still have? Then there's other people who tend to be more antagonists who look at the alternative. And then the idea of taking the high road is no matter what you're confronting, you rise above it. And I draw And as a young child, I had a very vivid imagination, and I would go into situations like a building and I'd think, okay, what happens if the roof caves in? How do we get out? How do we go? How do I help people? Will I survive if I help people? I don't know where that came from, but it was a consistent theme. Also, because I lived in a mining community where they blasted underground and the ground would shake, I also wondered about, well, what if the ground opens up? How would we survive that? So I've always had a bit of an interest in catastrophes and what happens when they occur. And my ability to think things through and plan for those kinds of hopefully unlikely events, but they're happening all over now, helps me build within my protagonist a way of navigating a world that does feel precarious, and yet they do it in a way that people can relate to. I mean, there's emotions, panic, and everything, but then you have to get through that into action, kind of deals with the situation.
So we see a ripple effect in the book where the central conflict tests every relationship. How does the state of the world in Fugitive Rifts challenge the trust between the characters?
Well, in my personal experience and in my observation of other people that are living through difficult times, I've observed that both at the individual level, at the community level, and even currently at the international level, people and organizations that we think we can count on sometimes just disappear from view. They bail and leave you hanging. And other people, organizations, and governments step up in ways that you never anticipated they would. And obviously, people who abandon us break trust. People, by their very actions, who come forward to help build trust by every gesture and every kindness and every way of helping people. The people that rush to a fire, the firemen and other volunteers that help people get out, pick up the pieces, the community that pulls together to provide basic needs. All of that is a ripple effect that I replicate in the various parts of the book, where the central conflict and even minor conflicts are tested. And I've just, through my observation, noted that it isn't predictable how the support comes.
That is awesome. And taking from the community basis and mutual aid and implicating that into a story this way that's really awesome storytelling and world building, in my opinion. So again, I'm putting this one on my to be read, and I feel like everyone else should as well. So
Thank you.
it's 2026, and we're obviously dealing with our own versions of rifts every single day, every moment right now. How much did current events influence the way that you wrote about a society pushed to its edge?
Obviously, the context in the real world when we're writing does have an effect. And it was astonishing to me the number of rift kinds of events that occurred during the time that I was writing this, including earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and my focus always being on what comes next, who steps up, who doesn't step up, how do people even begin to build their lives when they've lost everything. So I draw on the real world, but I craft it in the way I would like the world to be. And sometimes I get feedback that, I'm a dreamer and it can't ever happen that way. But I think it's a way of planting seeds for readers as ways of helping, because I think in a time of crisis, a lot of people would like to do something, but they don't know what to do. And if you ask a person in crisis, what can I do to help you? That's the last thing they have energy to cope with. The best advice I ever had was from a friend who was going through cancer treatment. And she said, don't ask what you can do. Tell me what you're going to do. Tell me something that you can do. And so I would bring her meals. I would drive her. I would sit with her while she went through her chemo infusions. We would draw together while that happened. I would bring painting supplies. We both liked painting at that time. So it's a world in my writing where I'm hoping people will understand. You figure out what little or what big thing you can do and do it. And if enough people do even little things, they add up to something significant. With that Thailand earthquake, I wrote a check, which I thought probably was just a drop in the bucket. Well, I knew it was for what they needed. When she came back, she gifted me with a scarf that one of the women made, and it's beautiful. And I said, I need to pay for that. I need the money to go back. And she said, no, this is to thank you for your generosity. And I thought, boy, little gestures mean big things to people who are going through crisis.
That's beautiful, and I totally completely agree with that. So, would you say that your prose is cinematic, or you see these scenes like a film while you're drafting, or do you work strictly focusing on the internal rhythm of your words?
I'm very visual. I see the scenes where I'm using description of the place, vivid color and texture and detail. And I sort of pan in as I walk towards it, and I pan out to look at the whole. And I also sometimes see it as a series of photographs or slides where I can focus on tiny details in different parts of the picture. And then the writing flows from my connection with that. And what I find interesting in my writing is the scenes where I'm describing things those scenes do not need much editing. Like, I'll do little picky things, but basically the core of what I write the first or second time is what's in the book. And I think it's because I actually enter into that space and see it and live it.
I can so relate to that. I'm a very cinematic writer myself, and you got me smiling over here, ear to ear, because I'm like, I can relate so much with that. And it really does make the dialogue. It's like you're seeing these characters already interacting in your mind, and you're just kind of translating what you see. It's kind of beautiful.
Yes, my characters talk to me all the time. And sometimes when I think they're going to do something, they take me off in a whole different direction.
Yes, they do.
And it's quite astounding the first time that happens.
It makes for some plot bunnies until you figure out your pacing, but they're always fun challenges in the writing journey I found. So,
Definitely.
every author has a favorite hidden truth. Was there a particular direction you led the reader in Fugitive Rifts that was especially fun to write?
In Fugitive Rifts, there are a lot of hidden truths that get resolved by the end of the story. But the one I'll talk about today is about a minor but significant character, Alice, who is a very troubled woman. And yet, at times, she's a totally endearing character. And sometimes she's zany and nasty and somebody that you wonder how she can survive the world that she's lived in. But there's a twist to her story that contains a hidden truth that in our world is a real one, and one that I hope readers can learn something about to understand the realities behind certain stereotypes in our societies, and that our initial impressions can be very wrong because people develop ways of hiding their pain or hiding their true selves as a cover for struggles they are having. If anything, for me, the realities of behind Alice's life is really an important truth for people to come to. And I had fun writing this because she's an irascible character. And I had a lot of fun putting her into situations where I'd wind up laughing rather ruefully about her antics. And the arc of her relationship with the main character is where we start to uncover the hidden truths.
Awesome. What is your personal philosophy on the perfect ending? Do you want to leave your readers with a lingering question, or do you believe in tying up all those loose threads?
I have written stories, mainly short stories, that leave the reader at the edge of a cliff wondering what happens next. But in my 3 books, I do try to wrap them up. And it's kind of amusing to me because with the first book, Spindrifts, I thought I'm one and done. I'm done writing. I'll go back to being retired. But then I realized there were still some threads hanging, and I was urged by 2 young people to write a sequel. And at the end of that one, I figured that I had wrapped it up tightly and everything's fine. But short stories started to emerge that may become a chapter book later on. With Fugitive Rifts, I thought it was a standalone book. Um, but there are some threads left hanging that are kind of I'm wanting to weave back into it. So we'll have to see how that turns out.
Well, that will be awesome to see in a future book. So, research for a book like this can be intense. Was there a specific area, sociological, environmental, or political, that you had to dive into for this project?
My background is in sociology and social work. So I have a really good understanding of human dynamics, sort of sociological dynamics. But even with that background, I did come across a program in Finland that I hadn't known about until I did some research that shows tremendous outcomes for tough issues, tough social issues. And so that piece of research inspired what goes on in Fugitive Rifts. Some of what I've had feedback, referring back to an earlier comment about you're a dreamer. And my answer is no, this is what Finland did. And this is the outcome, much like the outcome in the book. Where I really had to dive in was with the whole geological mechanisms on the west coast of Canada. I had to rely on research articles and a particular book by Matthews and Morgan called Roadside Geology. And I wanted to understand for a particular aspect the geological underpinnings of the way earthquakes function. We didn't know, we couldn't predict exactly when a major earthquake would happen. I knew loosely that it was a buildup of tension underground, but I needed to understand the science and the research on that to build the story so that it's quasi-realistic. I wanted to understand from the West Coast where the fault lines flowed so that I could develop places that would fall predictably outside of the danger zone for people to flee to. And that took a lot of repetitive going back and reading again because I don't use the terminology so much in the book, but I use the concepts to make events and people and outcomes realistic. And I had to keep going back to kind of double check that I was still on course.
So, for the new readers, what is the one thing you want them to know defines an Anne-Marie book?
The one truth people will find in all 3 of my books is the importance of finding light in a time of darkness, in a time of challenge. In all my books, people come together as a unified group in darkness to collaborate in response to a major crisis or a series of crises. In the worlds that I create, humanity in balance with the physical world is an essential component in picking up pieces of a fractured situation. just like those women in Thailand did, starting small, fundraising to buy yarn to build a collective to feed families and start building towards the rebuilding of their world. So the one truth that seems to come up for me is even in the most adversarial situation, people coming together, finding hope or finding light, all those kinds of imageries, and working together in different ways can build a momentum that can move mountains.
Absolutely agreed. And that is essential, even though this is a fictional book, that truly is essential to hard times and the many calamities that can befall us at any time. So I just love that. Again, I can tell I'm going to very much enjoy this read. So, how has your approach to the first draft changed since you started tackling these larger than life societal themes?
I have to laugh because when I think back to my first book, which was the first creative writing I had done in many decades, what I thought was the first draft was a mess. I gave it to friends and they very kindly said, well, you're used to academic writing and you have to shift, and kind of suggested ways. And I was crushed. But thank heavens for them, because through several iterations of what I thought was a good first draft, I finally did achieve a draft that could be a solid first draft. Through the second and third book, I found that my writing became more consistent, and I could imagine pieces, and I didn't have to recraft them over and over and over again. Um, and it's funny how the characters drive the larger than life societal themes. In Fugitive Rifts, in the opening, somebody thinks she's late. She is late for an invitation by a teacher to something after school. She thinks she's in trouble. She walks into a room with a few other people. Two she doesn't know, the other one is somebody she avoids. And those characters each brought with them some large societal themes, and they each face a moment where they wind up in a crisis, a personal crisis, and wind up in an unexpected place where they and the reader wouldn't have anticipated, hence the second meaning of fugitive. So when I think on the first book, second, third book, I'm finding that I've become way more adept at which social themes I want to deal with and how big I want to make them, and ways, which are imaginative ways of resolving them.
So, switching gears a little bit here, for authors stuck in the middle of a massive world building project, what is your best advice for finding the heartbeat of their story?
So it's interesting that you asked that question, because with Fugitive Rifts, I actually stopped writing for a month, it turned out, but it might have been forever for that particular book, because what needed to happen in the second half of the book felt so enormous. I wasn't sure that I could do justice to what my images were. And I wasn't sure in that time in my life I had the emotional resilience to recover from what I imagined I had to write. So I paused, I took a break, and I went out to our cabin by a lake on an island and didn't talk to people about what to me felt like a rather big crisis of abandoning a book, abandoning the characters. And I had to figure out, was I able to do justice? And I went back and forth. Do I abandon this book? I know people do. I didn't feel like I wanted to. How could I go around what I think and still do justice to what I wanted to accomplish? And after a month, I woke up one morning and I thought, I think I have a way forward, that instead of looking at the whole of what happens, I pen into smaller pieces of it while still explaining the large part of what was going on in different ways. And that's what I did. So I followed what the four central characters were doing at that time. And those gave me opportunities to telescope in. I had a minor character telescope his ending through that, although part of me still thinks I copped out a little bit and didn't challenge my writing. I found an acceptable compromise so that I could keep writing the book. And to other writers who reach a point where they're not sure how to get through a part of what they're doing, I would urge step back. It might be a step back and a short walk. It might be a step back and a long walk. It might be a step back for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And I know some authors put a book down and come back to it like even years later, and then they're able to finish it. Sometimes stepping back helps you move forward.
I am absolutely guilty of being one of those authors. I've written a book that was 55,000 words in 14 days, so I can do it super fast. But then there are some books that they just come, depending on what's happening. And you're so right. You have to find the time to refill your creative bucket or you will burn out. And
Mm-hmm.
if you just take the cues that, sometimes it's not necessarily that you're blocked, it's just you don't feel like the content's matching what you know is your greatest, so you need a little bit of a reset. And so a beautiful lake getaway, that sounds like my kind of time.
Yes, well, it's certainly a place where I'd get up in the morning and be inspired by the sunrises. I think I have 900 plus photographs of sunrises, and they're all different because this is a place I have spent big chunks of summers for 18 years now. So that's a lot of sunrises.
I'm sure many beautiful ones. So, is the journey of Fugitive Rifts a closed chapter? Or I know you kind of already answered this a little bit, but are there any more corners of the world that you're planning to explore?
Well, with Fugitive Rifts, if you had asked me that question at the point of publication, I'd say, no, it's all wound up. But Alice is on my mind because in the book, we reach a conclusion in her arc that is fine, but I find myself thinking, but there's all this other part that we don't know about Alice. And so I'm about 10,000 words into exploring Alice's early life and how she wound up where she wound up and what shaped the state we found her in during the events of Fugitive Rifts. This will challenge me a great deal. And because I'm a pantster, I still don't quite know everything that's happened to her. And some of it's going to be dark, as is the case with most of my stories, but I will shine the light on that dark. And I hope that by the end of it, Alice winds up in a different place than when we left her at the end of Fugitive Rifts.
So, my last question is, for those creatives who feel their work might be too niche, what is your advice for finding that sweet spot where their unique voice meets a broad audience?
It's an interesting thing that I thought through very carefully at the beginning of Fugitive Rifts because I'm very clear about my social consciousness and my political leanings, but I don't want to write books that are just about that. So I wanted to have a diversity that would be reflected throughout Fugitive Rifts so that different readers can find a niche in there that they can relate to. And in some cases, they can relate to with feeling at home with it. And in other cases, they might rail against it, but that's still making them think about the world and the way they would like it to be. Um, so the back blurb is clear that these four kids are being brought into a debate club. And that was a very conscious and deliberate decision rather than a class project, group project, or something, because the nature of debate is that you discuss and debate different perspectives about issues. And so the characters, certainly at the beginning, had very different standpoints on many of the issues that they debated. And that way, different people who are reading it can relate to at least one or two of the characters. Then each of the characters also have interests. Some are athletic, some are more academic, some of them are more artistic, and those are niches that other people can relate to. And then the social issues, the social themes throughout the book bring up things that people have different opinions about. So I really tried to take a broad based approach to a story without it getting too complex, where most readers can find something there that they relate to. Feedback so far has been positive about taking a very complex series of things and keeping it simple enough that it's a very readable book, is what I'm hearing.
Awesome. That sounds like you've really got a lot that we could look forward to here, and I have really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for helping us navigate the rifts of the mind and the page today, Anne. Fugitive Rifts is out now. It's a journey through the fractures we all feel. And if you guys are interested, I will have a link to the book in the show notes. Until next time, this has been The Mind of Sai Marie. And remember, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell.